It's Tuesday, September 10th, and today I talk with Tommy Ryan about how to minimize the impact on end users when doing a tenant consolidation. Hope you enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the Work Together Better podcast. This is your host, Danny Ryan. This is Three Will's official podcast about enterprise collaboration, how people, process, and technology combine to help organizations, departments, and teams work together better. Today, I'm going to continue on my conversation with Tommy Ryan about tenant consolidations. How's it going, Tommy?
It's going well. Having a good day so far.
Wonderful.
Feels like it's the middle of the summer, even though it should be fall soon.
Yes, we're at the beginning of September, and we're ready for the fall to come, but oh well.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will come sometime soon. So I wanted to continue on our conversations about tenant consolidations. And so just for folks who this might be the first podcast that you listen to on this series, what we're talking about is for, when a large companies, when one company purchases another company or gets, acquired by another company, sort of like they typically both have Office 365. And so there's a tenant consolidation effort that is put into place in order to merge one of the tenants into the other tenant. So a big company A acquires big company B, and so therefore you want to get all of that content that big company B has over into that first tenant. And so we've been working with some companies to do exactly this thing. And so what we're doing and focusing in on today is trying to minimize the amount of impact to your end users, because these are really important collaboration systems, and you can't always get all of that content out of big company B over to big company A in a weekend or in off hours. And so one of the things we want to do is look at batching of content. So let's get kicked off with that. Some initial thoughts on this, Tommy. What are some things that go into trying to minimize that impact during these types of projects?
Well, you really need to understand the content that you're going to move and the dependencies between the containers of content and just the expectations that you have around availability of that content to the users that collaborate with it. We like to look at moving this content in two approaches, one being a single pass migration and then a two-pass migration. And the essence of those two different approaches is the single pass is get everything over, and you have a cutover where you turn off access to the source, move it to the destination, and then re-enable it on the destination. And making batches small enough where you can do that with minimal interruption to the content. And that works well, and it's a great approach. It's a low-cost approach. But there are situations where you need to move several batches of content over and then release it as one big launch because of the interdependencies between the content. It could be a set of communication and department sites that everything's kind of interlinked and you want it to come over as a whole and not come over in pieces. So that requires a two-pass migration, more coordination. You're basically, quote, migrating twice, but the second time is only a smaller incremental amount of what's changed since you first moved it. So those are the two kind of technical approaches that we leverage when we're trying to minimize the impact to the end user, and understanding the content, how important it is to keep it available. There's certain content that people can live with it being down for 12 hours overnight or maybe over a weekend, and we tune to how many how many of these containers we can move in a batch, because there's a lot of coordination around running that batch. You're scheduling it, you're communicating to people around it, you're doing a validation and testing of, did the content come over, and you want all those processes done with the largest amount of content as possible, so you can have efficiencies. But then you have to cut it off and say, well, can't get more than this, because it's going to start interrupting our end users with collaborating around that content.
And since we're talking about Office 365, is this content could be anything from like things that are stored inside a SharePoint Online to things that are in Teams, or just the different services that you have within Office 365? So you're looking at sort of like how the different places where you're storing content, how they move over as well?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, and there's quite a bit of detail to answer that. But kind of putting it at a high level, you've got your email content. That's a big bucket of information around your communication internally and externally. And then you've got your SharePoint content, and let's kind of lump Teams in there too, because Teams is kind of that user interface to make it simpler to interact with that SharePoint content. And then you have the rest of your collaboration services that, most of that is not going to come over in a migration. There's not APIs to move that type of information. So you have to, think about what's the strategy to manage the expectations and work with, what do I do with my plans? Am I, looking to export this and import it back in? Am I bringing, do I have a transition period that we say, create your new plans here, your old plans finish up here? So you're going to have at a very high level things that you can move because there's tooling to support it. And then things that you're not going to move, but you're going to have change management over how do we transition over into the new environment.
And I would imagine too, if we're talking about large companies too, so there might be some, moving over line of business applications and some more complex things that are out there as well, where it's not just the content itself, but actually information about the applications that they built.
Yeah, and that, that's all going to depend on how coupled is that with Office 365. And of course, we're talking about, a tenant to tenant consolidation versus you could acquire a company and they've got SharePoint on-prem. We're working with companies that are in those scenarios that they're consolidating their content through an acquisition, but they're taking content from SharePoint 2010 and getting that over into the destination, which is Office 365 in the acquiring company. So, that step, maybe moving to Office 365 within that acquired company's tenant, or going directly from SharePoint on-prem to the acquiring company's tenant.
It sounds like, just again from an outsider looking in on this, that some of these sort of practices that we have with batching and sort of trying to minimize impact came from some of the different types of platform migrations that we've been doing. Been doing a lot of the Jive migrations and looking, and also a lot of SharePoint on-prem to the cloud that we're sort of taking what we learned there, applying it now over to tenant consolidations, and a lot of things end up mapping over fairly well because it's a similar type of activity that you're going through, and a lot of it has to do with. Every time I meet up with Kirk, he says the most important thing is communication, and that is really key to these types of projects.
It is. I think a lot of the principles carry over. You're just, you're batching it in a different way. So, in a tenant consolidation, you might have multiple companies coming into one tenant. And as a part of that, one of your factors will be, let's address company A first. And ideally, company A is a simpler scenario, less content, allows you to get the logistics in place around communications and tooling and just coordination with help desk and all those activities. And you do that at a smaller scale, so you work out the kinks before you go to the larger companies that are a part of that acquisition. And yeah, communication is definitely key, and I think what can be challenging in consolidation of tenants is the determination of what's going to happen. Are we going to keep the same email domains when we merge tenants? How do we transition that and minimize the impact during those migration activities? These all, no matter what type of migration you do, from going from platform to platform or consolidating within a platform, you care about what happens to the end user. Your goal is to minimize the impact to them, and the ideal scenario is you do it so well they might even not know that you've moved to a new platform. So if you moved their email and you have a way to push out an update where the email domain is reconfigured in the new tenant, and they just show up the next day and their email is working, then doesn't skip a beat. That's a very happy end user and a very happy company in that tenant migration or consolidation effort. And then you find things that, okay, we've got some constraints here that we're going to have to get the user involved in this process. How do we do that in a way that is easy for them? Give them an easy button. And some of that is, deciding what you're going to support and not support. And then what you don't support, you have the appropriate amount of communication and change management to help them address that same problem in their new scenario. And that not only communication, it might even require some training. There might be some new tools that they get introduced to because in their previous tenant, maybe they didn't have Planner turned on and they were managing their projects in Microsoft Project Server, and that could go away in that consolidation. And now they have to be aware of, this is your new tool for project management.
Awesome. Anything else before we wrap up?
I think at the end of the day, you bring the tools to bear to minimize the impact to the end user. So it takes time understanding what is the content, what are the end users and their expectations, and optimize your process and communication to make their life as easy as possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Tommy, for taking the time to do this, and thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Work Together Better podcast. We're available on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you're looking for a partner to help you craft a modern digital workplace on the Microsoft Cloud, please come by and see us at 3will.com. That's the number 3 spelled out, WILL.com. Thank you and have a great day.